but it does create problems for the Chinese economy, and one of them has been overcapacity.
Saw some headlines. Tell me if they sound familiar. Electric vehicles, weaker demand, overcapacity, price cuts. Oh, by the way, did I mention that's in China? So something's going on over there, and I'm curious if it's actually has to do with business or if there's something nefarious going on. What do you think, Joe?
Well, this is typical of the Chinese system, okay? What they do is they decide we want to go after some sector, we want to dominate some industry. So what do? Well, they go to all the provinces and they offer all these incentives from the central government down to the province level. And what do the provinces do? Well, they respond. They take the incentive and they start up all these companies to get into whatever industry it is that the central planning committee decides that's what they want to do. And in this case, it's electric vehicles. So at the peak, according to something I read this morning in 2019, there were 500 electric vehicle companies in China. And now there's still a couple hundred of them. And BYD, which is the biggest one, is cutting prices. They're obviously trying to kill the competition in China. We often talk about how China does this with other countries where they dominate, they cut prices, they subsidize industries, they do all these things to undermine business in other countries. But now it's happening internally too, because that's what happens, right? If you manufacture a whole bunch of electric vehicles, the price is going to drop. And that's what's happening. It's also because Europe and the United States have and there's talk that Korea may do it too, and some other countries around the world may do the same thing. Countries that have an automobile industry, they may raise these big tariffs. Europe has 45% tariffs on these electric vehicles or vehicles from China. I don't think it's confined to electric vehicles, is it? I think it is just vehicles. 45% tariff. We've got a big tariff on them, so we're not going to allow them to sell these cheap electric cars here in the United States or in Europe. And there may be some talk about Japan and Korea also adding tariffs and so forth to keep these cars out. So what does that do? Well, that just raises the amount that are inside China that they got to sell. So BYD has cut prices. You can buy one of these, their cheapest model for like less than $8,000. It's a glorified golf cart, but it is kind of, I guess it's transportation. Steve, you and I were talking to our client, and it was just there in China, and he said the thing that's really weird is when you're walking around these big cities in China, it's really quiet because there's no internal combustion engines there. It's all freaking electric vehicles. So he said it's eerily quiet. It's really kind of strange, but apparently that's going to get quieter because they got a bunch of cars to sell, and that's why they're cutting prices. Look, that is the beauty of central planning. You know, that's what happens when the government decides that's what they want to do, and you end up with a mess. And so I'm not shocked.
So, Steve, does that fit in with what we've already seen with China? Because they've built a lot of buildings and nobody's in them, and they've built all this other stuff and nobody's using them. It sounds vaguely familiar with all of this.
Yeah, it again kind of is one of the problems with state planning is one, it's really hard to be a planner and be smarter than a market to handle all the complexities. I mean, it's basically impossible. And then two, if you have a bad planner or a planner with a bad idea, God help you. And Xi especially has not like wanted the idea of a consumer economy. He seems interested in industrial production, people building things, maybe a war economy, building a lot of weapons, building a lot of capacity, but having and we talked about this. There may be reasons you don't want a thriving middle class. They start asking for political power, and the CCP doesn't really want that. But it does create problems for the Chinese economy, and one of them has been overcapacity. They keep building the ability to build things and building things, and they're building more things than their economy can absorb, and more things than the world economy can absorb. And this is actually so bad that the Chinese government's complaining about it. I mean, it's almost a farcical. But one of the things and Joe said what the cost of a new car is below 10,000 is actually even lower than that because they're selling zero mileage used cars. as a way to dump them. And the Chinese government's complaining about the dumping going on by Chinese companies because they followed the state planning of getting cheap subsidies and getting pushed into building overcapacity. And now they got to dump it at, well below cost. And I do love the idea of zero mileage used cars as the no. We're not dumping new cars. They're just zero mileage used cars that we're selling
That's a new classification.
yeah. Um, but one of my other than state planning, it doesn't work that the Chinese economy's really got some very serious structural problems with it. My other takeaway from this is, the trade wars are not just all about the orange guy in the White House. That there are, Europe's is not going to just let the Chinese dump a ton of cheap autos into its auto market and kill its automotive market. We've seen a lot of countries, responding with tariffs, with restrictions. So, I mean, I know the Trump show is really entertaining and people, clue into it and watch it. But even if you take him out of the White House, you've still got some real trade issues here, some real frictions. And as long as you have China continue to build more and more excess production, you're going to have some real problems here that are leading to fracturings of the global trade system. And I think this is just one more example of that Chinese policy of saying, "Hey, we're gonna pick a strategic sector to dominate. We're gonna subsidize it. We're gonna throw money at it." And then it's actually going to maybe have repercussions they didn't actually anticipate, as such as a price war in their own market and export markets that they're looking to penetrate, all started trying to throw up more trade barriers than would have otherwise have happened, possibly for multiple products of theirs. I mean, this is kind of an example of one of the bad blowbacks of state planning, and I think it's hitting them on multiple fronts.
Really didn't see that one coming, the Chinese government, because they continue to push forward. Is this part of a bigger plan, Joe? Because we had talked about the possibility of 150 nuclear plants they intend to put online. They're moving
Well,
forward.
well, look, the Chinese, the electrical, well, if you're going to sell electric cars, you got to have electricity. So that's the bottom line. Right now, they're plugging in their electric cars to a bunch of coal plants, although there are, I think, 50 something nuclear plants in China. They've got a bunch of nuclear plants on the drawing board. They're going to build 350 of these things, supposedly by 2035, which is a little bit scary, quite frankly, because I don't know what their safety controls are. And I'm from the nuclear industry, and I know what can happen. We've actually had here in the United States just had an issue over at Quad Cities nuclear plant up in Chicago. It's not anything that was affected the public or anything like that, but they did have a reactor shut down, a scram, that's a technical term, but whatever, a rapid shutdown because of a leak and so forth. But it wasn't anything that was escaped into the atmosphere or anything like that. So I worry about China building 350 nuclear plants, and I would really didn't we just have a little problem with a lab over there? I don't know, maybe not. Anyway, I would just the Chinese. It's interesting. Steve said that they don't have enough demand inside China to buy up all these things. The autos, I mean, there's just a ton of them, obviously, but there's other products too. But it's interesting. I've mentioned this before. The reason that they don't have a big consumer economy is because their people save like 45-50% of their earnings. Why? Well, because they don't really have a social safety net in a way, which seems bizarre. It's supposed to be a communist country. Isn't that mean that they're going to take care of everybody? But apparently not in China. It's not the way it works. And so they have to save a lot because they don't have a social safety net. They don't have unemployment insurance. They don't have Social Security. They don't have all these things that we have here in the United States. So they don't spend a lot of money, but for good reasons. I would just say this. I described the Chinese economy many years ago as being it's drawn on the Egyptian model. And I don't mean the Egyptians today. I mean the Egyptians who built the pyramids, because it's the same thing. There was no point to building pyramids other than a monument to whatever, whoever the latest emperor was, but or Pharaoh was. But it did keep people busy, didn't it? It kept them busy, kept the economy going. It didn't have any purpose, didn't have any use, but it did keep it kept the middle class, so to speak, occupied. And that's what China wants too. They want them occupied because that way the Chinese Communist Party ends up staying in control. So it is the Egyptian economy still, and it still hasn't changed. They're making different things, but it's the Egyptian economy.
So that was the end of your discussion.
Yeah,
Good.
that's all I got, man.
All right.
Sorry.
That's all right.
I don't know. Maybe we can debate sometime whether it was for nothing or were they landing spacecraft there, Joe. That would be a good debate sometime.
It could be. It could have been a landing site. I'm not sure. We'll have to ask them. What's that guy with the wild hair that goes on that show? We'll have to ask him.
Yeah, we'll never know because it has to go through a congressional committee. So,
Oh God.
hey, if you'd like more information about the things we're watching, things we're talking about, be sure you sign up for our newsletter.